as you know, I'm very happy that we're being joined by Bryan Rice from Halifax, who has a long relationship with Maude Lewis and collecting her work. And
Hello.
so I'm just very pleased that Bryan has agreed to join us. I just want to also welcome Alan Deacon to this conversation. Hello, Alan. Good to see you. And Alan is someone who knows a great deal about Maude Lewis, and he's been teaching me, and I suspect Bryan would admit that he's been teaching him as well. Hello, hello, Alan. Good to see you.
Hello.
And so I hope you'll chime in as we go, and feel free to add some commentary to the conversation as we go through this. So very good to see you.
Excellent. Well, first, Carlin, I just want to thank you for having me. I've had the great benefit over the last few years to get to know a lot of people who are interested and passionate in Maude, like I am, and Carlin's been a great help to me in helping to find some paintings for my own collection, but also to help broaden my understanding of Maude as an artist. So when Carlin asked me if I would do this talk, I questioned her on whether I was the right person or not. But given that it's through the lens of collecting, I hope there's something that might be interesting that I can add for the people watching, and that's the lens that I'd like to really present through.
I'm doing it by phone.
My somewhat brief experience of collecting Maude. So as you'll see, I've just shared your screens a photo of Maude Lewis in her home in Marshalltown. Maude, as most of you will know, was born in the early 1900s. We now know that she was born in 1901, though for a long time we thought she was born in 1903. The interesting thing that I believe historians have now discovered with Maude is the reason people thought she was born in 1903 is because that's what she put on her marriage certificate when she married Everett Lewis. But we now know she was born in 1901. No one can be sure of why she would put a different date on her marriage certificate, other than the fact that she was 36 years old when she married Everett, and it may be that she wished to appear just a couple years younger than she actually was. But my interest in Maude has sort of endured throughout my life. I've been collecting her works now since 2015, and I bought my first two Mauds about 2 weeks after my 22nd birthday. I can remember it very well. But I'd grown up knowing about Maude because my great-grandfather had known Maude Lewis. He himself had lost his leg when he was 8 years old, and he would go down and see Maude, visit with her, and purchase her paintings. I'm fortunate to have one Maude Lewis that came directly from Maude to my great-grandfather, but the other paintings that he had were actually stolen from his home when he was in his 80s. And that was part of the impetus for me to become interested and start collecting, is because I wanted to see my paternal grandparents get to enjoy some of the Maudes and the images that would have been familiar to them growing up in my great-grandfather's home. So if I move to the next slide, you'll see this painting of two deer in winter. This is the first Maude that I ever purchased. I bought this painting on Canada Day 2015 at an auction in Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia, which would have been probably half an hour from where Maude would have lived in Marshalltown. Now, at the time, I didn't know anything at all about Maude Lewis's paintings. I knew the story of Maude, I knew the geography of Maude, but I didn't have a real sense of what makes one Maude more unique than another Maude, what is significant about any particular painting, and what makes a stronger Maude or a weaker Maude. I simply bought this painting because I enjoyed the scene. I'd seen deer growing up in the Annapolis Valley, and I thought it would fit well at my parents' cottage where really we were living at the time. And this model has worked quite well for me with the underlying principle of making sure that when I'm buying paintings, I'm buying the paintings that I like. on the same day, I bought this Maud Lewis painting, which some of you will recognize as a view of Sandy Cove. Now, when I bought these paintings, I had no idea if I was paying the correct price, if I was overpaying, or what I was doing. And at 22 years old, I think they were around $6,000 each, and it seemed like quite a lot of money at the time. But what I did is I took these two paintings, so this one of the deer, this one of Sandy Cove, and I simply listed them on the platform Kijiji for sale to see if anyone else would be interested in these paintings. And I found that I had inquiries right away.
Oh, your shoes are dirty.
People across Canada wishing to acquire the paintings. So there was one gentleman in particular that was very much interested, and he wanted to buy both paintings from me. And so I called him and I said, you know, I offered them both. If you're really intent on buying them, I will honor it. But if it's just as well with you, I'd prefer to only sell you the one painting and keep the other one, because I think I'd like to get a little more serious about Maud Lewis. So he bought this painting from me, and this painting I continue to own, and right now it's held by the McMichael Gallery as part of their exhibition that has just finished, and hopefully a touring exhibition to come. So after I sold the Sandy Cove work, I started going to the commercial galleries in Nova Scotia that I knew carried Mauds. And one of them that I went to had this Christmas card available. And as soon as I saw the Christmas card, I fell in love with it. Again, at this point, I had absolutely no sense of what these Mauds were worth. I hadn't been tracking pricing. All I knew is I really enjoyed this Christmas card. So I went ahead and bought it. And I still have it in my collection today. Now, Alan Deacon's with us. I don't know that he knew he'd be seeing a picture of himself today, but one of the important meetings that I had was getting to know Alan a few months after I was collecting. And what happened is I started to attend these auctions where Maud Lewis paintings were for sale, and I noticed that there was another gentleman who bid on some of the paintings, and the ones that he was interested he had purchased, and others that I was interested I had purchased. And a mutual friend introduced us, and it became really a pivotally important thing for me as a collector, because Alan was gracious with his time. He was willing to mentor me and teach me about the paintings, and I started to understand that although Maud Lewis's style is very distinctive, there are differences among the paintings in her body of work. And I continue today, anytime that I'm interested in purchasing a Maud, and the advice that I would give anyone who's thinking about buying Mauds is to get a second opinion on these before you go ahead and pull the trigger. And though I feel now I have a better sense of what I'm buying when I look at it on my own, I'm still careful to always get that second opinion before I go ahead and purchase a painting. So by the end of 2015, I had bought a few Mauds. There's some that I didn't include that I had ended up buying that were weaker Mauds from the late 1960s. And at that time, particularly after Maud became to get some wider recognition in around 1965. So there was an article in the Star Weekly newspaper. Subsequently, there was a production through CBC Gem that did a profile on Maud Lewis. People started to purchase these paintings, and I'd purchased some weaker ones in around the same prices as the first few paintings that I'd shown you in the presentation. Then I was looking at galleries, and I saw this painting was available, and this painting really hit me as being a spectacular Maud Lewis. The trouble was the price of the painting was more than twice what I'd ever paid for a Maud Lewis prior to this time, and I had real difficulty getting my head around at that moment, how can one Maud be worth more than 2 times what another Maud is worth? And I don't know as we've ever had this conversation, but I ended up buying the painting, and I give great credit to Alan in helping me make that decision, because he was able to give me the confidence that this is a very strong Maud Lewis, and yes, if you can buy something that, one, you really like, two, is very spectacular, you know, that justifies the pricing. Now, when I look back today, I think the painting is probably worth more than 3 times what I paid for it. But at the time, I remember having just a pit in my stomach. But when the painting arrived in the mail and I opened it up, I was just thrilled that I had gone ahead and purchased it. And it's still one of my very favorite paintings in my collection. Now, this painting, some people will recognize. There was a similar painting called the Family Outing from the same sort of series of serial images that for a period of time had set the Canadian record for a Maud Lewis painting sold at just over 22,000. And this painting is actually how I really got to know Oeno Gallery to begin with, because it's a painting that Carlin had in on consignment that I was able to acquire. Now, again, in the context of me as a collector, I was at that point 23 years old. I was still in university, and of course, for someone that age, the painting was still what I thought was quite expensive, though on a value basis, it really wasn't. And Carlin was gracious enough to do a trade with me for 2 other Maud Lewises in exchange for this one. And this one is still in my collection today, and I really just love the image. Around the same time, I acquired the 3 Black Cats, which I think many people recognize as an iconic Maud Lewis. Part of the reason for this, in my opinion, is that the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia has used the 3 Black Cat image as part of their primary marketing materials for several years now. So when people see the 3 Black Cats, it's very much synonymous with Maud Lewis. And there's various different representations of the 3 cats image. I spoke earlier about Maud being a serial image painter, and I was speaking with Alan yesterday and talking about what this means. And this was a term that was coined around Maud because she painted the same sort of images over and over again. So no 2 paintings are exactly the same. Now, I did write down yesterday the name of the gentleman who would have been Harold Pierce, who at the time was the dean at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And he really wrote the first academic writing on Maud Lewis in 1997 with an article, The Serial Imagery of Maud Lewis. So we see in Maud's body of work the subject matter that is represented various times over. And for those that were on the call a little while ago, we were speaking briefly about the covered bridge image, which there's various versions of, though again, no 2 paintings are exactly the same. So there was a big turning point in my collecting where there was some very strong publicity around Maud just a few years ago. Some of you might remember this article, which was done by the Associated Press, was in the Globe and Mail. It certainly was in the Chronicle Herald, our paper in Nova Scotia. The Maud Lewis painting fetches $125,000 online. I can remember exactly when this happened because it put a great sort of upward pressure on the pricing of Maud Lewis. This was the headline in all the art papers. But what not everyone saw the headline was this next one that came out a few days later. Here we are. Fake bidder forces charity to restart Maud Lewis auction. So what happened is there was some fraudulent bidding in the auction, which still got all of the paper headlines, but there was no one who, in fact, was paying $125,000 for this Maud Lewis. The good news in a fashion is that it still did set at the time the Canadian record at a sale of $45,000. But this coupled with a number of different things, for example, the movie Maudie being publicized around the same time, brought a lot of renewed interest to Maude, and it certainly changed the pricing environment for her paintings. So for me, I have to say this was a real dilemma at the time. I was and am still a young person who owned some of the paintings, and you had a sense that what you had purchased was now worth more than you paid for it. But to me, my interest was in collecting the paintings, and I can remember thinking, how will I ever add another Maude Lewis to my collection if there's going to be this pressure, and how do I justify the value? And what I've found while continuing to collect is, if you're serious about collecting an artist like Maude Lewis, you know, the market may ebb and flow, but if you want to participate, you move along with that market as things go. So subsequently, I continued to buy Maude Lewis paintings, and this was one of the next paintings that I bought. Now, I absolutely love this image because when I look at this painting, I feel like I'm standing right there looking at the deer standing in the water. I think Maude captures something really excellent here that is relatable, but also is just simply a strong artwork. So this is a piece that's in my collection now that I can't ever imagine parting with. Around the same time, I purchased a Maude Lewis shell, and the shells, as I think you'll all recognize, of course, are quite a fragile item, and there aren't a huge breadth of shells that have survived like Maude's works on boards. One, I would suggest she certainly didn't paint on shells as much as she did on boards or on cards. But also the ones that were painted, some simply would not have survived. One of these things that I love about this image, and I'll try moving my cursor over, is the fact that there's no facial features on the man represented in the painting. But there's no reason that they need to be there. I mean, the painting simply works without them. So for a hauling logs image, you might see this represented on a Christmas card. You might see it represented on a work on board. In this case, it's done on a shell, and I just really appreciated this painting, and I was pleased to be able to buy it. Now, this work I always like to show people because when people first see it, they think, oh, Maude was so imaginative. You know, how did she come up with the big cow with the car coming towards it? And they think of that as a creation in Maude's mind. But that's not actually correct. This painting was actually a copy that Maude would have done or got her inspiration on of a copy of a Maclean's magazine cover, which you can now see.
Yeah.
That being said, if I flip back to the painting by Maude, you can see that there's elements that are clearly Maude Lewis that she's added to the painting. The church, for example, is something you see in a lot of Maude Lewis paintings as you do these buildings into the landscape. And one of the things that I think is so Maude Lewis and that I love about this painting is where the car has skidded to a halt, though the skid marks extend far beyond the tires on the car. I just think that's hilarious and very Maude Lewis. And of course, if I flip to the Maclean's magazine image, that's not something that you see in their representation. So even though it's a work that Maude got inspiration from the Maclean's magazine cover, it does nothing to negatively affect the value of the painting. In fact, any instances where I've seen this come available, they've commanded very strong prices.
And I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second and just
Sure.
ask people to mute their microphones if they haven't. Somebody's called in on a telephone, I think, and their microphone is open. So if I could just ask everyone to make sure your microphones are muted while Bryan's talking. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Carolyn. Now, this image is a painting that I was not able to acquire. This painting currently is the record holder at the public auction of a Maude Lewis. it sold for $45,600 plus HST. Now, that may sound like a lot of money in a fashion, but I very much feel now as a collector who's got to know the market that price is very much justified. There are some things in this painting that I absolutely love. For example, you'll see all of the fall colors on the trees that are taking place in the winter scene. It's not something we'd necessarily see in the reality of everyday life, but it works perfectly in a Maud Lewis painting. You also see so many of the figures that don't have facial expressions, but in a Maud Lewis, they're completely unnecessary. I also think where she does the attention to detail with the drifting snow or the reflection of the railing here, they just add great elements to the painting. So though I wasn't able to acquire it, it's one of my very favorite Maud Lewis works, and I hope that people would enjoy seeing it. And you know, from my perspective, it helps to justify that some Mauds are certainly command more value than other pieces. And I would suggest that with this setting the market, or setting the record, the market has very much got this right. So I'd like to now show you a few highlights from my my Maud Lewis collection and tell you a little bit about why I like these paintings. The first one that I'd like to draw your attention to is this image of a train station in winter. Now, of the serial images that Maud would have completed, the train station in winter is one of my my favorite serial images. One of the things that Alan Deacon pointed out to me, and I think you'll enjoy, is that in this image you see the smoke from the train going and blowing one direction, but the scarf on the people walking blowing completely the other direction. It's not something we would ever see in reality on a windy day, but it's not out of place at all in a Maud Lewis painting. And to me, it's something that is very distinctive and very personal to Maud. And we see this represented in this serial image time and time again. So that's one of the elements that I really just love about this painting. The next painting I'll show you is an early winter scene. Now, this actually came out of the same collection originally as the schoolhouse in winter image that I showed you a couple moments ago. I think it's a strong image, and I think Maud's colors show so well against the white or off-white background that she uses. And to me, these vibrant colors against a white background or winter scene really pop out with Maud Lewis, and it's one of the things that I think is so distinctive about her paintings. I also love the high steeple on the church in this work, the people that are tobogganing, and I can certainly remember that from my my childhood, and it just screams Maud Lewis to me, and it's a painting I would just at this point never part with. Again, I spoke of it on an earlier image, but this is a painting that I think is great because we see the scene that is clearly in winter with these vibrant colors on the trees. We see the pond on the right that is not frozen over, even though we're in the middle of winter time. And you'll notice that the horses that are pulling the logs, between the two of them, we only see 7 legs. Again, in a Maud Lewis work, it's not necessary for her to do any more than she's done. She's hit it just right, and for that reason, I think it's just a great painting and very distinctive to Maud. The next painting is a harbor scene. Now, this painting I acquired exactly a year to the day that I bought my first Maud Lewis, and I went out to a local gallery that was doing an opening exhibit of Maud Lewis paintings for Canada Day. I got up early in the morning from Bridgetown, and I drove about 3 hours to be there when the gallery opened, thinking I better get there quickly to look at the paintings. And of course, as these things go, I arrived and there wasn't another soul up that early who had made the trip to the gallery. And I went in, and I can remember looking at paintings on the wall, and I think they probably had 12 paintings that were up and available for sale. And I looked through the 12 paintings, and there was nothing that quite appealed to me. And I asked the gallery owner, are there any other paintings that might be coming for sale? And they said to me, well, we have this one from our own collection that we were thinking of listing. And they lifted this painting from behind the desk, and I knew it was one that I needed to acquire. So this would be a 1940s image, and you can see the attention to detail, particularly in this area where she's done the shimmering reflection that anyone who's spent time around water can relate to. And this is a piece that is loaned to the McMichael at present. Also, again, I spoke briefly of the Christmas cards. Always find it so interesting that when Maud did these Christmas cards, she was selling them probably for 25 cents a card. That's it's changed dramatically since that time, and if you were an original card owner, you would have done very well. But again, not all the cards that she did complete have survived, and she didn't do the cards as frequently as she did the works on board. And I've heard stories from people that I've met who grew up in Maud's community who talk about receiving the cards on Christmas and then reading them like they would other Christmas cards and tossing them into the fire when they were finished. There's another gentleman I met that at one point had 16 cards, put them up in his cottage, and the children used them as a dartboard. So you can see some of the work simply have not survived. This card that I acquired was in the 1997 touring exhibition, The Illuminated Life of Maud Lewis, which was really the first major exhibition of Maud Lewis works that went across the country. Another one from this collection, I'm sorry the picture's a bit blurry, but this came from the same owner and was also in the Illuminated Life, and show you some of these cards that were completed by Maud. Now, when Carolyn asked me to do the talk, I took a look through her website and thought it'd be a good idea to also talk about some of the paintings that are now available at Oeno Gallery and that are on the market today. And one of the things that I think is good when you're considering Mauds is to look at a breadth of images that's available for acquisition. There will be Mauds, some of which are at private galleries, some of which are in private hands, and others that are in auctions to acquire. So I thought I'd just take some of the images and speak about what I think of them for just a moment. So the first one that I wanted to include was this portrait of a white cat with the butterflies that I expect several of you have probably seen. Often when you talk to people who haven't studied Maud Lewis, but you talk about cats, they of course gravitate to the three black cats serial image. But there were other cat images that Maud would have completed, including different variations of this portrait of a cat. I don't have it included, but one of the things I think is really interesting about this specific painting is, along with the painting, there was an envelope that had a date stamp on it from the local post office. So somebody had written to Maud discussing acquiring paintings. Maud had sent them a letter back, and when she took it to the post office, there's a date stamp, and I can't recall the date, but I can recall the year as being 1967. So it gives us an ability to date this painting, and I think those pieces of provenance can be really exceptionally important. We spoke of Maud as a serial image painter. So one of the serial images, of course, is her pair of oxen portrait, and again, one of the iconic Maud Lewis images. Now, this painting spans every season in different variations. You sometimes get a mixing of the seasons, which I spoke of with some of the other paintings. But I can say in my own case, in my collection, I have 4 variations of this portrait of a pair of oxen, because though you can have, a serial image represented, as I said earlier, no two paintings are exactly the same. So when you can get that diversity of paintings and compare them, you can really discern what you like about them, what was different, and you realize that Maude wasn't just doing the exact same thing over and over again. Every one of these paintings is a creative endeavor on their own. Also included this painting of the horses hauling logs. Of course, growing up as I did in southwest Nova Scotia, you're aware that forestry is a great part of the economy in that part of the world, and this is certainly a scene or at least an activity that Maude would have observed growing up in southwest Nova Scotia. So we see again, you see 7 legs between the 2 horses, things that you will always see in a Maude Lewis painting, like the high horizon in the background. I think before we were starting the formal part, someone spoke about having an image of logs being hauled. So again, it's a serial image, and I think this is a great example of that image. We've also spoke of some of the Sandy Cove and Harbor images that Maude completed. So Sandy Cove is a scene that Maude would have painted over and over again in serial fashion. And what's a little bit different about this painting is the 3 boats that are positioned in the foreground. I haven't seen, other than this painting, this specific type of composition, and enjoyed that. And I like the fact that she just uses this little bit of paint to do some reflection of the boats. And where we spoke about shells, I thought I should include a photograph of the shell painting too, just where this is an example of a shell that has survived and hasn't been broken or discarded over the years. And you get a lot of the elements that you would see repeated in Maude Lewis scenes in this image. So I also wanted to give a bit of thought around if a person is thinking of becoming a Maude Lewis collector or wants to learn a little bit more about Maude, how does a person go about doing that? And one of the things that I did when I started to get really interested in Maude and started collecting her work is went out and tried to find all the literature that I could on Maude. This is good for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you some of the history of Maude Lewis, of the geography of the area, and you can get a sense of her life with respect to the paintings. Also, of course, in any of these publications, you're going to get images of the paintings contained within them. And I'm very much of the opinion the more artworks you can see, the more you can discern what you really like about specific paintings and what ones you might want to have within your collection. One of the books that I always keep on my desk and I frequently give is this new book from the McMichael. So this is called Paintings for Sale. And this includes images of every painting that was included in the recent McMichael exhibition. So if you wanted to see around 140 Maude Lewis images, if you picked up this book, it gives you an excellent chance to see a cross section of her work. The other thing I would recommend people to do is to go around and see the public exhibits, the commercial galleries, and anywhere you might be able to see a Maude Lewis painting in the real. It's always better when you can get near to a painting and really analyze it. And I find even with paintings that have now hung in my home for 5 or 6 years, there's times where I'll just stand and look at them, and the more I do that, it's surprising how much I continue to notice in the paintings. Even though at first glance they appear to be simple, there are complex items that sometimes take a long time to really recognize. And one of the things that I think is also important to think about is why or how do you want to go about collecting Maude Lewis? There's certainly the distinctive serial images that are well known by the general population, like the 3 black cats or the pair of oxen. When I first started collecting for a while, I thought, I'll try and check different boxes. For example, try and get a 3 black cats, pair of oxen, a covered bridge, and that would be sufficient. Now, what I found over a period of time, because I want to collect a breadth of paintings, is that sometimes I might want multiple examples of serial image, or another serial image may not be as important to me to have included. And I think that's going to be different for each collector, but taking time thinking about that is really important. And over time, your opinions on these kind of things may change too. So I'd say you have to be open to going in and being aware of how you feel looking at the paintings, and whether they're the right fit for you as an individual collector. I also think it's important to think about what's next for Maud. So there's certainly been the McMichael exhibition that was on and very successful. My understanding is that the attendance at the McMichael during the Maud Lewis period was double what they would usually expect to have at the gallery. So it was extremely popular. The plan for this exhibition is to now have it tour through Canada, go to the United States, and potentially even be shown at an embassy in Japan. Now, obviously, all of us are thinking about COVID-19 and how does that impact things. So if that will impact the touring schedule, I don't yet know. But my last discussions with the McMichael, they're still planning to go forward with the touring exhibition. One of the things I just got to know about actually last night was the Art Gallery in Nova Scotia now has a virtual tour of their permanent Maud Lewis exhibit on display. So I've included the link here for anyone that wants to look it up or wants to look at the video of this presentation afterwards. I spent probably 2 hours looking at it last night, so I think it would very much be worth your time. And I think one of the things that's important for Maud is continuing to elevate her as an important artist to Canada, an important artist to Nova Scotia, and more than just a conventional folk artist, if you will. Sometimes when an artist is given the connotation of being an untaught artist, they're not getting the same kind of recognition that really they deserve with respect to culture, to geography, and to their distinctive style. And I think as Maud gets more attention, as prices continue to change, it's important that we understand the differences between paintings and continue to work to understand Maud. This year it is the 50th anniversary of Maud passing away, and we're still learning things about Maud Lewis that long after her death. And I expect, for me and others, I'll continue to learn new things about Maud throughout my lifetime as I try to better understand the artist. So in closing, when I think about collecting Maud Lewis, or I think about understanding Maud Lewis, I think of this really as a creative experience to be shared. I think it's a good idea if you're an owner of Maud Lewis paintings or a prospective owner of Maud Lewis paintings to consider sharing these paintings with people, lending them to galleries, and just letting other people take out of the paintings what you've taken out of them. And that will start with family and friends and can expand from there. And I think some of the private lenders that have helped, particularly with the McMichael show, in bringing forward paintings that otherwise wouldn't be seen by the general population is really important. There are also people that can help. So if you're looking at Mauds, try and rely on commercial galleries to help you build your understanding, talk to other collectors, but particularly seek out experts on the paintings. I mentioned earlier, but I continue to consult with Alan Deacon anytime I'm looking at a painting, because the more opinions, more knowledge, and the more that people who are interested can share, the better that's going to be for collectors and for the general public interested in Maud. There also, of course, are pitfalls, and that's where advice is important. Like any artist whose paintings now sell for fairly significant sums of money, there are other people who will want to copy the images or create fake paintings and sell them as authentic. I wouldn't say it's something that's necessarily going on every day, but on the other hand, if you were to find you had purchased something that wasn't correct, I'm sure it would be very devastating. Also, it's important to get opinions from galleries and experts to know the differences between Maud Lewis paintings. You know, people used to assume that Maud Lewis was a Maud Lewis, and therefore they all had the same value. My experience as a collector is that that really is not the case, and it's best to get other opinions to help you differentiate between what are the paintings that are really worth owning and what are sort of weaker or later paintings that might not fit a collection. The final piece of advice I'd really give is if you're interested in collecting Maud, part of the hardest thing is getting started. Though I bought my first Maud when I was 22 years old, I'd been thinking about buying a Maud for 2 or 3 years at that point. And of course, if I'd started collecting earlier, I would probably, one, have a few more paintings by now, but also no one can completely predict where the market is going to go. And if you're going to be a consistent collector, I think it's important that you basically adjust to the market as it moves. So I would leave that as a comment and welcome any questions. And I would say, from my perspective, you know, I'm always happy to share experience or give opinions on anything people might be considering. And I think for Carlin's part and for others, there's a willingness to do that too. So with that, I would turn it back to Carlin and be happy to take any questions.
Did anyone have any idea how many paintings Maud might have ever painted? Alan, do you have any idea about that?
Well, I'm not too sure, but you know, she married Everett Lewis in 1938, and I think maybe in her good years, she might have been able to do one a day or something like that. So, when we get to 1965, that's when she becomes sort of famous. So you get sort of 27 years of painting quite consistently. I don't think in that last 5 years she was able to do, shall we say, one a day or maybe even one a week. But and if we were then to sort of halve that number, maybe if she had done sort of 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 or something like that. Now, of course, some of these paintings wouldn't have survived. I mean, I've heard of stories of people buying a painting and sending it to a friend, shall we say, in the States or something. People have come for a visit and said, "Oh, where have you put the Maud Lewis's? Oh, we didn't like those. We threw them on the fire." So you get those kind of things. And I doubt very much whether many of the Christmas cards have survived, simply because Christmas cards are very often sort of thrown away items. But when I'm sort of talking about, shall we say, 4,000 to 5,000, I'm including cards and painting on the boards as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, I was just wondering if there's a difference in the serial auction ones where some have 6 legs, some have 7, some have 8. Are some considered to be more desirable or more valuable? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tobin. I would say there's certainly some that are more desirable, but I would tend to look at it, the way I look at it myself, is more on a painting to painting basis, rather than saying, okay, all oxen with 6 legs are worth more than all oxen with 8 legs, because I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Certainly the very strongest examples and the easiest way is really to compare them, in my opinion, should be worth more money. You know, there's pair of oxen paintings that I think are worth in excess of 40,000. There's other pair of oxen paintings that I would be hard pressed to pay 5,000 or 6,000 for. So I think it very much depends on the image, depends on the time period. I would say, generally speaking, you know, the very most valuable ones that I have seen have happened to be earlier paintings, but I don't know that those rules are necessarily lines in the sand. I think it's something you have to look at the individual painting on and make a determination of what you think it's worth. And that's where, from my perspective, it's helped to have other people I can consult with and get their opinions on an individual work. So that's what I would offer. There's certainly some that are more rare, but part of collecting, what is interesting is going through and making those determinations on your own, and that's part of the creative experience of collecting mods. So there's things, if you look at a lot of the paintings that you'll notice are quite unique, and then you have to make a determination of whether you think that ultimately impacts the value, and whether the value you see other people might see too.
And condition has a great deal to do with the relative value of a work too. I've seen some mods that were left in cottages that they weren't heated, and they were thrown into drawers, or maybe they were in the kids' room, and they were in pretty rough condition. And so condition, I think, is a big consideration for sure.
Correct.
Thanks.
Bryan, as the market expands, the difference in prices with respect to the various time frames or images is certainly going to dissipate, isn't it? Because you're going to get an awful lot of people that are buying them for speculation.
My thesis, I wouldn't say is completely consistent with that. I think that the more the paintings are observed, the more that people can make general determinations of what mods are worth more than others. I would say, yes, there's always people who are going to make speculative decisions about paintings, but in my experience, the speculative decisions on paintings are at the lower end of the market, not the higher end of the market. A person who's speculating might say, okay, I'll spend 10 or 15,000 on a mod, but most people aren't going to speculate and say, okay, I'll spend $45,000 on a mod. The people that are spending that kind of money are looking at something specific to that painting and saying, okay, this is a valuable artwork, and for that reason, I'm going to acquire it. So I think the floor may continue to come up on them, but then I think there's still a range where price distinctions will be made. And if I was buying, I would certainly make those distinctions now. And that's always going to depend too on what a person's motivations are for buying them. Some people will buy them solely because they think they're investment piece, and I think that may be very valid. But my advice to people is always still to buy what you really like, because if you buy it and for some reason your thesis is not wrong, you still want to enjoy it while it's on your wall. And that's what I've really enjoyed about collecting mods is yes, I think Maud's best days are still ahead of her, but irrespective of that, I buy the paintings because I enjoy observing them on a day-to-day basis. And that's my primary consideration, but that might not be consistent for everyone.
No, it is for us. I mean, we both fell in love with them, and the ones that we have bought are basically ones that we really liked.
Right.
The one in the kitten in the teacup with the butterflies.
Right.
I don't know how many serialized paintings she did of that, but for us, that was sort of a really unique painting. Have you seen it?
I have seen variations of that serial image, yes. And I would say there are certain serial images that you certainly see more than others. But there's some images, for example, that Maud, like the Pair of Oxen, would have painted in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, right up to her death in 1970. There's other images like the Covered Bridge that, if I understand correctly, primarily occur in the 1960s period up to her death in 1970. So it depends also the period of time and how frequently Maud was creating any given image. And even the portrait of the white cat, for example, on the red background that I showed, I would expect that to come up much more infrequently on the market than I would a 3 black cats or a single white cat for that matter. So some variations within even a serial subject might not occur as often as others. And sometimes what I'm looking for in a serial image is, take something like Sandy Cove, for example. If you have just Sandy Cove, but then you add something like boats to it, or you add an oxen hauling hay or something in the foreground, the more of those things you add to the painting, given some of the things Carlin spoke of, like condition and time period are there, those to me make it very desirable comparative to what you might see on a more regular basis. So I would say your cat in a teacup isn't an image that I would see as frequently as I would some of the other cat subjects.
I'm going to ask Alan to weigh in on that question as well, Jack, but just before he comments, I would add an observation, which is that when we first started selling Maud Lewis paintings, pretty much the market was very domestic. That people had known her in the Maritimes, and then other Canadians and maybe a few people from the northeastern United States knew about her work. But then the film did the circuit of the globe, and I can tell you exactly when and where it's being done, because I'm getting phone calls from Germany and from Houston and from Australia and from Hong Kong, with people who have just seen her work for the very first time, and they're now very interested in it because they're seeing her in the context of other painters who are painting scenes from domestic life, like a Daphne Ojig or a Willem Kerlik. There is a value put on that kind of observational painting that elevates her work beyond that of many folk artists, I think, and that is starting to become a globally recognized pattern in terms of collectors of work. But Alan, what's your thought about the shifting value of the work?
Hi there. Yes, I still think in some ways her work is very much undervalued. It's funny to think that when I bought my first couple of paintings, Maud Lewis was still alive, and I spent $10 each buying a painting, but that $10 was an awful lot of money in those days. And then the biggest jump in the price of her paintings really happened when she died in 1970. And then the price jumped right up to about $325. But luckily, the price stayed in that range for, 15 or 16 years. You could go to Manouche Gallery and maybe pay $1,200 for a Maud Lewis painting. You could go up the hill to Zwicker's Gallery and you could get a painting of similar quality for $300. So they do range quite a lot. I will say, I think the person who spoke about the cup in the teacup, cat in the teacup, that would be an extremely rare image indeed, I think. One of the big mistakes I think I made in the beginning, and I think Bryan sort of alerted to this, was I sort of collected in the beginning as though I was collecting stamps. I'll get one of these and one of those. Well, Maud Lewis's work is not like stamps. So even though you might have one of the oxen, an oxen done in the 1940s is very different from an oxen done in 1968. So I'm always quite happy to have a really detailed look at the work and buy the work really on its merits, rather than saying to myself, oh, I don't have a particular one of those, and so I want that to sort of fill in a hole in my collection. So I don't know whether that helps people a little bit. I think maybe with this COVID, I think maybe prices of, well, in many things they've kind of dropped, but I think with Maud Lewis's work, I think it's held its own fairly well, and I think if something was outstanding as that schoolhouse in Winter one that was sold at a Waddington's auction for 45,000 plus the buyer's, that includes the buyer's premium. I think even if a work came on the market today at an auction, I do think it would sell for serious money these days. I think gone are the days when you can, buy a Maud Lewis for just 1,000 or 2 or something like that. Those days are finished long ago.
And also they're getting harder to find, which is part of the challenge for people like me. There's a question, Kathleen, you had a question, if you'd like to raise it. Turn your mic on, please. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
The serialized paintings of the covered bridge. There's so many different versions of that painting. I've noticed sometimes the signature of Mauds on the right-hand side of the fence. Sometimes the sleigh in the background is blue. Is there only one copy that you know of the covered bridge that has the 2 children skating on the pond? I know that Jack says he has a copy of that. But would there only be one copy of that? Because I've looked in different places to see if I can find another version of that covered bridge that has the children skating there.
Kathleen, we looked at ours. We don't have it. There's no skaters. But it's a different color. It's sort of an orange and a green and a yellow.
I would say.
So I'm trying to. Go ahead.
I would say, Kathleen, I've seen different versions of the covered bridge that does have skaters. I would say they are less common than the covered bridge without skaters. But I wouldn't suggest that there's only one version that has skaters. I've seen multiple variations of that serial image, albeit less common than the covered bridge with just 3 sleighs, where there's one coming towards the bridge, one coming out of the bridge, and then one in the background going across. So to me, when you see those things, if the painting is strong and it includes them, to me that would certainly add value to the painting. On the other hand, I'm always interested when there's still very strong examples of just the traditional covered bridge image. Those are still appealing to me. So I would say there are ones that you see less than others, and there are ones that you might not see unless you happen to be in the right house or at the right collection to see them. I wouldn't say the public always gets to see the broad breadth, and of course I don't, for that matter, or anyone else, but I can say I've seen more than one example that has the skaters.
Let us all take an opportunity to say thank you very much to Bryan for this talk. Appreciate it very, very much. And I've learned some things I didn't know, which is always one of the great pleasures of a conversation like this.